Thanks very much. Welcome everyone. Thank you for braving the cold to be with us this morning. I have to say that as someone who studied in Oxford, this room in particular makes me scared. I did some of my exams in here, and walking in here I was getting nervous all over again, having remembered my exams many decades ago. But it's great to be here at the Oxford Farming Conference with you today. And I'll give a bit of a scientific flavour to some of my comments and see it from a government angle. It's now more than a decade since some of the really landmark papers that established the gene editing techniques that we're now talking about. And in the decade since then, we've become increasingly aware of the substantial benefits that we can get by using gene editing to produce crop varieties that have beneficial traits. I'm an environmental scientist by background, and for me, the biggest excitement there is the potential to make crop varieties that have benefits for the environment. We can make crop varieties that are that require fewer pesticides or herbicides, that require fewer nutrients, and which are more adapted to climate change and the drought and heat stress that will come as a consequence. So it's been one of the most exciting things that I've been involved in the 5 years that I've been Chief Scientific Advisor at DEFRA, is the passage of the Genetic Technologies Precision Breeding Act that, as Mario said, concluded in 2023. And that, by allowing the use of modern genetic technologies to mimic traditional breeding, will generate all sorts of good outcomes for food systems and for livelihoods around the world. And that primary act of a couple of years ago changed the law, but it didn't actually establish the regulatory mechanisms to enable the law to be put into practice. So it was really delightful news yesterday that the Secretary of State for DEFRA was able to stand here at this meeting and announce that that secondary legislation would be introduced to Parliament before March of this year, enabling the good to come from precision breeding into our marketplace. Now, it's an exciting time not just for scientists like me, but it's exciting for farmers, for the new varieties that precision breeding will allow, for consumers, for the new and improved products that we'll see on shelves, and indeed to the breeding and biotech industries. And I think all of those groups are represented in this room. It also, this secondary legislation will directly support a number of government agendas, including those central missions to the new administration. For instance, the growth mission, perhaps most fundamentally. Precision breeding is a really important technology within engineering biology, which is seen as a critical technology for UK growth. And precision breeding is included in the Industrial Strategy Green Paper published just a couple of months ago as a priority area for further investment. Plant breeding itself, without precision breeding, is already really important for the economy. It adds about £1 billion of additional value to UK farming and food supply chain. And every £1 that we invest in plant breeding generates about £40 of return to the UK economy. So the ability of precision breeding to be able to accelerate that process has tremendous potential for UK growth, feeding into the growth mission. The ag biotech sector internationally is thought to become worth about £20 billion globally, annually by 2034, and demonstrating the potential that the UK has to play into that market as we go forward with precision breeding. On the health mission, another one of the government's 5 missions, there's tremendous potential here to develop foods that are more nutritional and less harmful. So, for instance, the first commercially gene-edited product anywhere in the world that was available on supermarket shelves were tomatoes in Japan with increased levels of a beneficial amino acid. And we know that we can make tomatoes as well with higher vitamin D content because of the work at the John Innes Centre here in the United Kingdom, again with beneficial potential. On the removing harmful aspect, we know that there are trials going on at the moment in Rothamsted of a wheat which is free of acrylamide, known to be a carcinogen, and that NIAB are busy working on a celiac-safe wheat. There's also tremendous potential to remove allergens from all sorts of other products, such as peanuts. The third mission I'll talk about just briefly is the clean energy mission, which has a substantial net zero and carbon reduction focus to it. And there's tremendous potential again for precision breeding to help with this mission, reducing the need for nutrients, reducing crop loss, and developing innovations such as that which Rothamsted are working on to design animal feeds with a higher fat content, making those feeds more energy intensive and suppressing methane emissions in livestock. It's not just emissions that precision breeding can feed into, though. It's also the priorities that DEFRA has and the Secretary of State in DEFRA has. Mario's already mentioned the focus on food supply and food security, and clearly precision breeding can help with that. It can also help with the environmental benefits that I started my comments with through the Secretary of State's priority for nature recovery. And just to mention one final example here, an example which I'm very interested in scientifically because I've wrestled with this question myself a lot, is the issue of breeding varieties of sugar beet that are resistant to virus yellows, so that we don't any longer have the conundrum about whether to use neonicotinoids to solve that particular pest problem if we can grow crops that are resistant to virus yellows in any case. And DEFRA is currently funding work with Tropic, British Sugar and the John Innes Centre to produce sugar beet varieties that will be resistant to virus yellows to solve that particular problem. So I'll end there with that example, but that's one of very many examples of the types of new crop varieties that precision breeding will allow and that this secondary legislation will see come into action in the near future.
No, thank you very much, Gideon. I mean, if we continue with Susan, thank you.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Always great to have a conference on your doorstep, so that's good, even if it was quite a cold cycle this morning. So I'm here really as chair of the Food Standards Agency, and the FSA is a non-ministerial government department. And we were set up 25 years ago to ensure that food is safe and that it is what it says it is. We also want food to be healthier and more sustainable and to support innovation in the food industry to help achieve those goals. So through our market authorization system for new foods, our risk assessment team scrutinise applications for new products to ensure that all the necessary safety checks have been done before they come to market. Now, the FSA board is very clear that innovation in the food industry can help develop more resilient production systems that are kinder to the planet and produce foods that are healthier for the consumers. We also know that innovation will enable the UK to make the most of our outstanding scientific developments and bring jobs and investment to the UK. And Gideon's given you some fantastic examples of where that's already beginning to happen. But in the FSA, we like to worry about the risks. And we know that innovation always does carry some risk. And ensuring consumer confidence in new products is absolutely essential to trust in the whole food system. So I'm not going to apologise that the FSA will always put safety first. But we do need to take a proportionate approach, or we recognise we will stifle innovation. And that's the balance that we're trying to strike. So for us to do that well, we really need to understand the new technologies so that we can judge the risks correctly. We also know that our regulatory systems need to evolve as the science develops. So I think precision breeding is a really good example of how we're trying to do things a bit differently in the FSA. Our consumer research showed us that people were genuinely interested in the potential of these products, but they were also a bit cautious about the possible risks. Consumers tend to be wary of new technology. They often have a very limited understanding of just how much scientific work has gone into producing the food that's on their shelves already, that they eat happily every day. So their trust in food is predicated on having confidence that somebody in the system is looking out for them and that somebody is ensuring food is safe. And that's the job of the FSA, and we take it very seriously. What the Precision Breeding Act did was to remove precision-bred organisms from the legal definition of genetically modified organisms. And what that then allowed us to do in the FSA is to develop a separate regulatory framework for precision-bred organisms, and to develop an inspection and enforcement regime to support it. And in due course, we will make recommendations to ministers for the approval of these products. The new framework is designed to provide a rapid route to authorization for PBOs where we have no safety concerns, and an alternative targeted route for organisms where we think we need to do some further checks. We'll also provide consumers with information that they can trust in the form of a public register of precision-bred organisms that have been authorised for use in food and feed. And we hope that this evidence-based approach will deliver the proportionate regulation that protects consumers whilst also allowing responsible businesses to grow and to thrive. There will be comprehensive technical and administrative guidance so that developers and businesses are able to understand and comply with the regulations. And it should go without saying that in the future, any breaches of the regulations will be investigated and disrupted, just as we would do with any other breach of food law. So when is all this going to happen? Well, as Gideon mentioned, it was confirmed by the Secretary of State yesterday that the secondary legislation will be introduced into Parliament by the end of March. Our technical guidance will be released in draft form to coincide with the laying of the regulations, and that will give us a chance to seek stakeholder views before we publish the final guidance when the regulations are made. And I hope that you'll engage with that process and help us to make sure that we've got this right. The dreaded IT, which we need to support the regulation, which includes the application portal and the public register for authorised products, should be ready by the summer. So we really hope to be able to launch our new regulatory service in the second half of this year. I hope that's good news to end. Thank you.
Right, good morning everyone. As Mara said, I'm from a company called Planet Earth. We are one of the UK's largest growers of tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers based in Kent. And we also import those products, all for supply into UK retail. However, I'm also involved with the British Tomato Growers Association and co-chair the technical committee, and today I'm really representing the views of that sector. I want to explore and share with you why we think that sector could be a really good first point for exploring those opportunities of commercialising precision-bred varieties into the market. However, I would never imagine I'd be sitting here talking about this 10 years ago. I thought with our sector being relatively small, highly controlled, the actual value of that, there'll be better value exploring the opportunities and challenges, solving the challenges in field-based systems rather than in protected. However, I think the high level of control that we have actually is one of those reasons why perhaps we are a really great place to start looking at how we roll this technology out into commercial production. And I'll explain a little bit more about that now. And what I mean about high levels of control, it's sort of three areas really. The first one is around growing. We're obviously growing in the glass boxes. We can, with high technology, we can control all the inputs, the outputs, we can pretty well measure everything, and there's a higher level of biosecurity. We have control over the packing operation, where we can, all the raw material, we know exactly what product it goes into, what package, what customer, and even to what depot. So the England-only regulation piece, we could work with that, even if we could, and with our customer partners, deliver just to UK stores if that's ever a requirement. And then we're part of a really highly controlled supply chain, as are a lot of fresh produce businesses, where we'll grow exactly what the customer wants, make that decision every year based on the contracts we get, and that includes the varieties, the specifications, the codes of practice we have to operate to. And with that becomes the benefit or the challenge for us as businesses. We are highly audited. We have multiple audits every year, checking those processes, systems, and traceability is a key part of that. So we can trace a pack from the shelf to the seed, and from seed to shelf. That's how the fresh produce sector, that level of detail we operate to. Now, if we have control over growing, that level of control, why are we interested in precision breeding? Well, we're like every other business and growing business in the UK. We're under significant increasing challenges that are threatening the profitability and viability of our businesses. We have the cost of production challenge, and for us, it's driven a lot by cost of labour, cost of energy. We have to adapt to changing market need. We are a customer-driven business. We have to grow the right varieties, the right quality, the right standards. And then again, as growers, we still have to protect our crops. And we're seeing increasing challenges, whether it's through climate change or whatever, but more fungal disease pressure, new pests, more pest pressure, pollination challenges through higher temperatures, and plant viruses, new plant viruses. And I want to explore the plant virus issue in a bit more detail and explain a relatively recent issue we faced in the tomato world. Now, in 2015, there was a new tomato virus found in Israel. It's very virulent, 20 to 70% yield losses. It's highly persistent, being viable up to 6 months. Very easily transmissible and hard to eradicate. And it became a notifiable disease around the world. But despite the regulation that was put in place, it has spread worldwide. Now, that's impacted the UK in a couple of areas. The tomato shortage we had in winter 2023 was in part caused by the virus hitting crops in Spain and Morocco, the time of year when we rely on a lot of imports. And it's hit UK growers, despite the fact that we've invested hundreds of thousands of pounds in improving biosecurity in our nurseries and our pack houses. The number of disease outbreaks we're getting has increased. And that has meant some of the traditional, much-loved premium tomato varieties that we used to grow are no longer viable because they're persistent, and we're no longer growing them as growers. Arguably reducing part of our competitive advantage because we were exceedingly good at that. So we're finally starting to get, 10 years later, some resistance and tolerance come through conventional breeding. But it's into varieties that have other issues or maybe not quite as good as what we would like for to grow for the UK consumer. But we're having to grow them because it's the only way of de-risking our growing operation. So, looking forward, why are we interested in precision breeding? It's because the next time we get a plant virus, can we fast track that resistance? Can we get it into the right varieties that we've already got? Can we get it in 5 years instead of 10 or quicker? Can we breed better varieties for the UK consumer that they want, whether it's adding value through improved health benefits, flavour, what other traits? And then can we consider adding precision breeding to our crop protection, our shrinking crop protection toolkit to help us deal with these changing environments and the new challenges that are facing us, and allow us to get our crops to market and reduce the risk of growing. So finally, if we do get the enabling legislation that's been promised, and even if it's England only, our sector would welcome being part of a joined-up conversation with stakeholders. But those stakeholders need to involve our supply chain, from the breeder right through to the retailer. We need to identify the risks that we face, current and future, and look at where precision breeding could support and add value to that. And together prioritise where we think those benefits are and which ones we want to target first, and consider those benefits around resilience, improved health, maintaining choice or improving choice for the customer, maintaining quality, and delivering that healthy product at the right value. Because at the end of the day, we still want consumers to eat more fruit and veg in the UK, and wouldn't it be great if it's more British homegrown production too? That's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, good morning also from my side. Niels Bauer. I'm representing Bayer today and managing director for the UK. And I want to take a step back, and I think Bayer has a long-lasting history of over 160 years of bringing innovation to customers and ultimately to society. And I think there is a good proxy for our commitment to innovation If we look at our global agricultural investment in innovation, we invest 2.5 billion annually, which, if you break it down to a figure in a day, it's almost 7 million a day, day in, day out, weekends included, even though I don't know if the output on weekends is the same as on a weekday. But no, it's just kind of, we as a company are heavily invested in innovation, and therefore it's absolutely exciting times we see right now here in the UK, and also the progress we have heard yesterday that we are continuously making this progress with the precision breeding here in the UK. Also, when we think about seeds, we are from a global level a global seed company leading in this sector. We are leading varieties in corn, in maize, in soybeans. Here in the UK, we market seeds in oilseed rape. We have also a maize portfolio, but also vegetable crops. We are an important supplier of vegetable seeds, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, and also strawberries, one of our latest additions to the portfolio. So thinking about this, for us, precision breeding as a global company is important, and we do have heard a lot of positive opportunities with this, and we also see these positive opportunities, and we do invest on a global level, on a high scale in this new technology. And I want to share one of our products in the pipeline, which is called short stature corn. So short stature corn is a shorter, more resilient and high-yielding maize plant. And that's an interesting fact, because we have started this product with a conventional breeding program, and we have just launched first varieties in Southern Europe, in Spain, this year or last year. But what we are now doing is we are developing a further improved and advanced product for the Americas market through precision breeding. And I think this gives also a good connection to kind of the policy, because ultimately policy and regulation, of course, would enable then also the right innovation. And we see that when we have policy, and we have seen in the last 10 years over the globe a lot of development in policy for precision breeding. 10 years ago, I think Argentina started with introducing their first regulation. As a good example, I think Canada also published their policy in 2023, and then hopefully we can also add the GB in 25 to this, because ultimately, of course, innovation needs certain security, and having an innovation allowing policy and an open policy is then also helping to further push and further enable innovation. And I talked a lot about innovation, investment, etc. But ultimately, I think we also need to take a step back, and you said it very nicely in terms of what ultimately the consumer wants and what the customer needs. And I think here it's so important. Agriculture is facing huge challenges, and we see the phenomenon of climate change is nothing which is a far away phenomenon. The last 2 years in autumn, I think a lot of our customers had big problems getting the wheat or barley crop in the ground, and there are huge challenges to ultimately continue to have a secure food supply and continuously growing a crop. And of course here, precision breeding is a great opportunity to add another tool to the toolbox. But I think there is also an important piece which I want to make, or which I want to raise, is we need as many tools in the toolbox as we have, be it plant protection product, biological or chemical. We need digital innovation. We need breeding effort, and also I think GM technology. All these different tools are relevant, and they should be in the right mix, open to growers and to producers to ultimately make sure that we can continuously grow food in the right amount to an affordable price for the society. And I think this is also how I want to end. I think it's a great opportunity, and I think Bayer sees that precision breeding and this kind of now positive outlook for the next couple of months is very positive, also as a stepping stone, being here in Europe, and maybe also guiding the way for the European Union in this way. But also I think GB and the UK has the unique opportunity, not stopping there, but really thinking through what is regulatory setup not only for precision breeding, but ultimately for different agricultural technologies to really enable the science base, because there is a great scientific, and we've heard a lot of examples how great things are happening in the UK, because the scientific basis is here, and ultimately the regulatory autonomy is also here, and then really leading the way in a scientifically based, innovation open regulatory environment to really boost agriculture would be a great opportunity. So with this, I think we are going to hand over back to Mario.
No, thank you very much. I think you would agree with me that it's been a fantastic opening to what it could be now a very, I would say, engaging conversation, what I would expect to have in the next few minutes. We'll get the chance to thank you at the end, but let's get straight into anyone if he has any questions, any comments to start with. Okay. Well, there are many. Good. Let's start.
Thank you very much. I'm Vicky Robinson from the Agricultural Industries Confederation. And I just wanted to pick up a bit on that last point, and also the point that Susan made around obviously the pace of change, the scale and the pace that we need to move at, and whether or not the regulatory system is ready to move and at the pace that's needed as the science evolves and it's ready, and the sort of agility that's needed in that sort of dynamic environment that we're working in.
I hope so. We'll see. I mean, the first challenge is to get the system for precision breeding up and running. I think the biggest challenge we face is this will be part of our general market authorization process. We've got about 400 products in that at the moment. That number's coming down over time. We're just about, we're getting close to the point where we're getting them out faster than they're coming in. But general resource is always going to be challenging. But what we are doing, and if you follow our board papers, you'll have seen this, is we're making quite significant changes in the regulatory framework. So, for example, we've got some secondary legislation which is, on the books, if you like, to go through, which will remove the need for us to do renewals every 10 years in some of our regimes. That's really important. It will reduce our workload, but we actually just think it's the right thing to do. Once a product's been authorised as safe, it's safe. If new evidence comes up to suggest it isn't, we will always look at it again. But the idea of having to have 10-year renewals for some of our regimes we thought wasn't proportionate. And so we've taken that out. And we're continuing to look at where we can make other changes so that we streamline the process to make it as efficient as possible. And as new technologies come along, we will look in detail at those, and we will see whether we need to set up different ways of looking at it, as we have done with precision breeding. We've just launched a regulatory sandbox to look at cell-cultivated products, because we recognise, again, this is a radically new technology, and we need to understand it, and we then need to ensure that our regulatory framework is fit for purpose. So I absolutely accept your point, and we're trying our best, is what I'd say. But we can do that best by working with the industry, so we understand the technology. So as you're developing it, we need our risk assessors to be staying in close touch with that. That's why we're quite excited about this sandbox idea, and it may be something that we can use again if there are other brand new technologies in the future.
Anyone wants to have a comment? Can I follow with Belinda, please? Sorry.
Hi, Belinda Clark from Agritech-E. I'm interested in where this goes now from a European perspective, and I guess the question is mainly directed to Gideon around, I think the hope and expectation is that this demonstrates a leadership position for the UK. who holds the pen on those conversations with European counterparts? Is that you, Gideon, with your peers in European countries? Is it the larger agribusinesses? Do we wait and just let them watch what's happening in the UK? How do we build on that leadership position to cascade that thinking and the great work that we've been hearing the FSA is doing to ensure that that the rest of Europe can follow where the UK is leading?
That's a good challenge. I think the short answer to your question is we need to do that in lots of different ways. So we need to do it through scientific channels such as the ones that I'm engaged with, but through policy and regulatory channels and through political channels as well. So there's a lot of conversations going on with the Europeans in lots of different forums. As a little bit of background, it's true to say that the European Commission has now very clearly recognised that the current legislation in Europe for genetic technologies is not fit for purpose. That's a published document that states that, and that they are requiring themselves to make changes to that regulation. But as we all know and have experienced in other situations, it's very hard to see change in the European system because of the number of different parties that need to agree. In recent times, the blockers have mostly been coming from Germany. We know that some of the eastern countries as well are also rather opposed to the technology. And until there's alignment with all countries, it'll be hard to see the Europeans really make substantive moves in this direction. But it's something that we are seeing increasingly. Countries are moving in that direction, and eventually I'm sure they'll get there as well. I hope that the UK, through its leadership, particularly if it's able to benefit from that leadership, and if you start to see food security or economic gains coming in the UK, I think it'll turn the Europeans on more to the technology and the benefits that might come from it. And I think it's going to take some time. And in the meantime, we have to be very careful that we can control the way that we supply our new products, precision-bred products, into other markets such as Europe to make sure that we're sticking to their regulatory environment while we're also benefiting from the changes in our own.
It's not for us to tell Europe what they should do, but it is for us to share our experience. And we've had a number of conversations with colleagues across Europe and indeed in Brussels. I was going to make the point that Gideon tagged on at the end, this issue about traceability. It is incredibly important that we are very, very clear and have very, very good traceability. And one of the reasons, that the public register is so important is that people can actually track exactly what has been authorised. And that's something where the supply chain is really going to have to stand up to its responsibilities until this technology is much more established.
I think before we move from this point of territorial boundaries, I think you made a point, probably you mentioned that this is England. I'd like to hear from you, Rob, how you see this as potential challenge in terms of the legislation principle is on.
Not working.
No, it's just because this one was.
I thought this one is not working. That's not working. Okay, yeah, then it's not working.
All right, okay. UK, England only. Right, is that testing? Yeah. Right. England only. I don't see it being a problem for our sector. Most of the tomatoes we produce in the UK are in England. As I say, the levels of control we get, we can trace it. We also don't export currently to Europe. We're still a net importer in the UK, producing around only 15% of what we consume. So everything we grow can go and will probably for the near future be UK focused. So I don't see the issue around the England legislation restriction being a problem.
Yeah, Craig Lewis, PIC and NIAB. I mean, I was really excited, contrary to what I said yesterday about the announcement yesterday. I think the potential for the secondary legislation coming in plants is great. Animals hopefully soon, but that's a separate point. The question I've got for the plant breeders on this, I mean, we talk a lot about whether it's tomatoes, wheat, barley, and all these other stuff. But, you know, really UK agriculture is a biological system, and livestock is part of that. When I look at the potential in plant breeding, I'm also looking at things like grass wards and grazing, and the potential of precision technology to make more robust grazing grass varieties, silage varieties, fodder crop varieties. But I've not really heard much about that from the plant breeding sector in terms of the use of this technology, you know, supporting grazing agriculture, making it more robust to climate change or improving soil qualities. I just wondered what this group thought in terms of, is this on the radar? Is that a great opportunity that can come from this technology?
I think overall, thinking especially kind of, we are not in grass business, but ultimately in our silage business. And here, these kind of milk output, etc., improving digestibility are targets which we target with breeding efforts, be it conventional breeding or in the future, hopefully also precision breeding opportunities. So yes, digestibility and these kind of things for the sector are important breeding targets we have.
I think it's a great challenge that you've raised, and I mean there are a lot of species that we eat, and even more that we could eat. So there's so many places that you can use precision breeding to enhance the varieties that we might grow. We're scratching the surface now in the early days of this technology. It is only 10 years since it was invented, and the legislation is still catching up as we're talking about today. I gave an example in my opening comments about a feed that's being developed which would help to lower methane emissions from livestock. You've given a number of other examples. I know that there is active work going on to precision breed root systems into plants that would enable nutrient access more readily, which could be transformative in a lot of different species. So I think there's lots to do, is a short answer. And that's not just for crops that we grow in this country, but internationally. And often forgotten in these sorts of conversations in the UK are the benefits that we might get for precision breeding for the developing world, where food systems are often very vulnerable to change, and we can really help to make them more resilient into the future. Just very briefly on animals as well. I mean, I think this is to follow the remarks of others about being aware of the consumer. This is a way in which the legislation really did change as it was progressing from 2021 onwards. Is that the consumer concerns about animal welfare as a consequence of precision breeding, or what led to that being withdrawn from the primary aspect of the Act. We do, as a government, still intend to take that forward, but once the welfare issues have been better sorted out than they are at the present.
Morning. Hannah Senior, PBS International and past president of the US National Association of Plant Breeders. I wanted to ask a question from a more entrepreneurial point of view. There are two main issues that I see. Entrepreneurship, smaller companies wanting to use this technology is one of the key ways that it can be democratized and made more acceptable to consumers. There's two big barriers that I hear coming from small companies. One is a real risk aversion from brands and offtake companies to take gene-edited products. They're concerned about consumer reservations, and they're really not willing to take that step because of the risk involved. So I wondered if you could comment on that. And then a related point around the entrepreneurship is, because the UK is behind the US in particular, a lot of the entrepreneurial talent has moved overseas, or companies have incorporated in the US instead. So what can be done to improve the entrepreneurial environment for people who want to use this technology to progress in the UK as well as elsewhere?
I think this is one for Rob, but I'll just very quickly say that if you ask consumers, and we've done a lot of polling in the UK at the moment for plant varieties at least, the consumers are about twice as likely to say that precision bred crops on their shelves would be acceptable as would say it's unacceptable. So there's quite strong consumer support for these products. So if there's a perception in companies that that's not true, that's probably a false perception. I think this is probably a question for Helen.
Well, certainly the first part in terms of the risk aversion piece. I I think there's now greater awareness of the importance of things like food resilience, because if you haven't got it, you can't sell it. And we've seen that, as I've referenced in the 23 food shortage. Retailers, in certainly our sector, have had to adapt significantly, for example, because of this virus issue, taking on new varieties, new sources. It's caused them an element of challenge within their business, and the associated increased cost that goes with it. So I think there's an absolute awareness now of some of those risks, the impact of climate change on supply chains. It's causing, some concern in terms of when they look at their future strategies around what do they do around supporting their business and grow their businesses, how do they de-risk those supply chains. So it is awareness. It's now precision breeding is of interest as a tool, but it goes back to my earlier point of we have to involve everybody in that supply chain in the conversation to identify what are the priority areas we are going to go after first that adds value to everybody and that consumers can potentially see. It's almost a pull. We need to deliver the market need, and the technology will evolve. It's an evolution, not revolution process. We shouldn't be trying to push, certainly in our sector, push the technology, push the traits into the market. We need to almost pull them together, work on those ones we want to develop.
In the FSA, we do quite a lot of consumer research, and what was clear when we started doing this a year or so ago is that most people actually had never heard of gene editing or precision breeding. And in a way, that's kind of helpful because there's a sort of blank piece of paper on which we can write the story of this. And we did some very sort of deliberative work with them. It wasn't just a survey. We got them into a room, we talked about it, we discussed the pros and cons. And what became clear is that the more people understood about it, the more interested and the more positive and the more enthusiastic they were. And I think that means there's a real a space for companies to really tell the stories that matter to consumers. And I think it's incredibly important that, particularly with the early products that come through, that there's a really strong consumer story and a consumer benefit. Because I think they are open to this, and they do want to see some of the climate resilience, nutrition, animal welfare, whatever. There needs to be something that's important to them. Then on the innovation issue, not really my bag, but I'm a scientist, and earlier this week I was at the UK Food Security Conference with Minister Zeichner up in York, and we had a look at some of the plant breeding work that they're doing there. UKRI were also there, and I think there's a real opportunity for UKRI, and particularly for Innovate UK, to pick up some of this and to really encourage that, bridge that gap in terms of actually getting, supporting some of the SMEs to get into this area. Of course.
I'm willing to be, maybe at the time we are now, we want to be taking the last question on the list, take maybe three together and we can do that 3 times. Nick, if you want to go first, and then Tom, and then
Yeah, it's actually building on the last comment really, is how do we, as the UK, really capitalise on this act? Are we going to be building bilateral funding agreements? Are we going to be creating soft landing packages for businesses to come to the UK and do the work here, right? Because I've talked to a lot of businesses, especially in Europe, they're watching very closely what's happening here, and the opportunity for the UK is to really engage and support that engagement. So what are we doing in the background to prepare ourselves to capitalise on the act?
Do you want to take all 3 of them before you?
Tom Allen Stevens. I lead the British On-Farm Innovation Network. We've actually got a project underway bringing gene-edited cereals onto commercial farms for the first time across Europe. But my question is for Susan, really, on the regulatory side, because as I understand it, you've had the regulations sort of ready to go since about March last year. And I just wondered how that played with the secondary legislation. Do you need to sort of get the ministerial go-ahead before you start doing that? And how much is the passage of the secondary legislation likely to influence the regulatory framework that you've got at the moment? Is it a case that you kind of done your work, or is the secondary legislation going to potentially change what you've already done?
Lydia Smith from NIAB. So quite a quick question, really, and you made me think about it, your question about animal forages. What is the enthusiasm, and I direct it very much towards Bayer, to look at some of these smaller orphan crops which haven't had sufficient resources? And I see Gideon nodding because DEFRA has put a lot of shoulder behind, increasing the diversity, but if all the precision breeding goes into the big boys, the wheat, barley, and perhaps tomatoes, is there going to be enthusiasm for those orphan crops where potentially, it would be cost effective now where it wasn't in the past?
I've got the microphone. Shall I very quickly do the FSA one? So we do need to wait for the secondary legislation before we go any further. We don't anticipate it will require any changes, but let's wait and see what happens. But we are ready to go, and as I said in my opening comments, as soon as that's out, we'll put the guidance out, we'll have the consultations with stakeholders, we'll make any adjustments that need to be made and hopefully get on with it.
Yeah, maybe addressing this topic of orphan crops or crops with less focus, and you're right. I think overall we see right now, especially with other like GM technology, there was a clear focus on the big crops. And I think right now it's waiting to get the final legislation, look at how ultimately the numbers play out. And then there will be decisions around where to invest and where not to invest. And I think this is ultimately, of course, if and this is what we are seeing. Of course, we have a focus because we are focus in our seed business is corn, soybean, oilseed rape, and certain vegetable crops. Nevertheless, I think it's ultimately, of course, the opportunity once you have a policy in place which is allowing to further spread and ultimately make a business case out of this, that this then gets more interested for the industry. But it's something to look and see and wait how this further develops.
And shall I deal quickly with we're looking forward through the room. So the issue of how to further incentivize businesses into this, especially SMEs into this country, is an interesting one. I think there's a perception that one of the fundamental barriers has been the regulatory barrier, and that we're trying to lift that, and that will make life a lot easier. There is already a lot of activity in this area. I've given a few examples, some big institutes like NIAB, like Rothamsted, John Innes, James Hutton. Universities are all working with novel science in this area, generating a lot of spin-outs. And I've spoken to a lot of those companies in recent times who are trying to bring this technology to market. So it's something that's really recognised as important. It's something we are looking about also the financial mechanisms in government, and I won't say anything more about that at this stage, a recognition that some other ways of supporting these companies would be helpful to make sure that their market can really thrive.
Thank you very much. I mean, we are running out of time, but before we go, a couple of things. First of all, is to recognize the excitement of what all in the sector we have. Yesterday, when the minister actually stopped on that sentence and said, the legislation is coming, even it was a kind of a spontaneous applause someone did in the audience. It was clearly a surprise for even the minister. I'd like to thank the panel. I think it's been great. You did a great job in kind of taking us where we are today. Please, thanks the panelists. Yeah, thank you.